Okay, we're going to start here in 2 minutes, and we get to talk about John Madden and Joe Namath and a whole bunch of other people who are in the as part of this presentation. So we'll wait until 7 o'clock. We got less than a minute, and we'll get going. And I'll introduce myself. So we'll go. Actually, why don't we start now? Good evening, and thank you to the Huntington Library. My name is Evan Weiner. And I've been doing this kind of thing for a long, long time, and I want to thank the Huntington Library for inviting me. I started my career in 1971, September of 1971. I was in 11th grade at Spring Valley High School over in Rockland County, and the Spring Valley High School advisor, Joe Dionisio, was also my English teacher. He said, "Student, you have a good voice. How would you like to be on radio?" And I said, "In the worst way," and I was. I was on WRKL radio with a show called Tiger Talk with a woman by the name of Doris Chan and a guy by the name of Eugene Delicio back in 1971. Joe D also opened the doors for me at the Nyack Journal News and the Bergen Record. And by 1978, I was doing some news for WNEW, Metro Media Radio in New York, the home of William B. Williams, who played Frank Sinatra and Nat King Cole and Ella Fitzgerald and Peggy Lee. I was doing news, and I was covering a story at the Tappan Zee Manor over in Nyack, New York. It was in 1978, March of 1978. It was a Democratic fundraiser, and I was told, find anything you can, and I did. John Lindsay, the former mayor of New York City, wandered over to me, somehow picked me out and said, "I like you, I'm going to tell you something," and he told me that he was running for the Senate, state of New York in 1980. I ended up on WNEW. Henry Marcotte called me, said, "We'd like to have that story." I said, "How much you can pay me?" $10. Sold for $10. And I was on WNEW doing occasional news through October of 1981. Among the stories that I was assigned was interviewing Ronald Reagan during the 1980 presidential campaign, Ted Kennedy during the 1980 presidential campaign, returning hostages from Iran. That is me at work, October 23rd, 1997. Sync Studios on 56th Street in Manhattan on 11th Avenue, and John Madden's radio show. It's Dennis Steele to John's left, you're right on the screen, and me with hair in those days. I was only 41 years old, so I had hair. Anyway, before I start with looking back at the history of football and how a mom and pop operation that didn't know anything about business became a billion-dollar business, I figured I'd tell you a story about Madden. Most people don't remember that Madden coached the Oakland Raiders for 9 years and that he was on TV. Now he's just a video game. Madden, I guess it's 2021 now, whatever it is. But anyway, John had an assistant by the name of Michael Frank. And Michael Frank is telling me the story one day about the Drake Hotel in Chicago. That's the Drake Hotel in Chicago from 4 years ago. And Michael's telling the story about how he and John get off the bus. Willie's driving the bus and the Madden Cruiser and all that. And they get into the lobby of the Drake Hotel in Chicago with Drake. And Madden checks in. Michael Frank checks in. They go to the elevator, and says that there's this short, skinny guy in the elevator with an English accent, and goes up to John and says, Mr. Madden, oh, you're great. I love you. I'm an English guy. I don't know much about football, but this is great. This is great. You've taught me a lot about football. I understand it now, and I just want to shake your hand." And with that, he gets off the elevator. And John looks at Michael Frank. He says, "Who's that?" Says, "It's Mick Jagger." "Who?" "Mick Jagger. Can't get no satisfaction." And John says, "He looks like he can't get no satisfaction." Years later, John tells me, "Hey, did you watch the opening of the ABC show this week, Monday Night Football show?" I said, "No." He says, "Well, we got this act. They're great. You got to watch this act." I said, "Oh, who are they?" He said, "The Rolling Stones." I said, "You mean, Mick Jagger couldn't get no satisfaction?" John looked at me, cursed me out, and that was the end of that. But John did it lovingly. Anyway, John is part of the machinery that has made football the billion-dollar business it is. But it wasn't always like this. It wasn't always like this at all. Oh, that's the cover of my book, America's Passion. And actually, John picked out that cover for me. It was Benny Feathers. He played with the NFL's Brooklyn Dodgers. And John always told me, he said, you want elements, you want grime. That's football. Elements, dirt, grime. And there's a little unnecessary roughness as they try to bring him down. If you look at the left fist and look at the referee looks like he's ready for a golf outing. And this is the Brooklyn Dodgers, who played at Ebbets Field until about 1945 or so. And it's against the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's in Pittsburgh, and that's a clear day in Pittsburgh because it was known as the Smoke City. And that is in the late 1930s. Coal miners' game. From mom and pop store to multi-billion-dollar business. The roots of the game are actually in West Pennsylvania or West Virginia or Ohio in the coal fields, in the coal mines. So that's where the roots of the game are. But the first game that we know of, recorded, was in 1869 down in New Brunswick, New Jersey. Princeton against Rutgers. And take a look at that. Princeton against Rutgers. There are a lot of people on the field that day. Some of them are wearing suspenders. Some of them are not in football uniforms, or they were just a bunch of guys kind of playing rugby. Rutgers ended up winning that game, beating Princeton 6-4. First intercollegiate football game, November 6, 1869. Game was played with two teams of 25 men. There were 50 people on the field, each under rugby-like rules. The two teams lined up with two members of each team remaining near the opponent's goal. Hopes that they could scoop up a football somehow came over to them and slip over the line and score from an unguarded position. 23 players were divided into groups of 11 and 12, 11 fielders lined up in their own territory as defenders, and 12 Bulldogs carried the battle. Rutgers won that game. I don't know what the point spread was, but they won that game 6-4. The first rules, though, for American football were written in 1876 by Walter Camp, who was the coach of Yale University. And he would become known as the father of American football. And in the non-COVID world, every year, there is the Walter Camp All-American Dinner up in New Haven, part of Yale University. And it was Walter Camp who set up the rules. It would be Walter Camp 30 years later that was involved in changing some of those rules. Pudge Heffenfinger was the first pro. Made a lot of money. That was in 1892. He's given $500 to play for the Allegheny Athletic Association. Signed a contract first with the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, and then he decided to go to the other team because they paid him more money. He was a former Yale All-American guard, Pudge Heffenfinger, and he got the money, and he played against the Pittsburgh Athletic Club and is the first person believed to be paid over the table to play football. There were probably a lot of others who got money under the table that everybody knew about, just didn't want to talk about it. This is a 16-year-old kid. His name is John Bralier, and he is an open pro football player at the age of 16, 1895. And he took $10 to play, which is now about, I'd say $180, and expenses to play for the Latrobe, Pennsylvania YMCA against the Jeannette Athletic Club. The Allegheny Athletic Association team fielded the first completely professional football team for its two-game season in 1896. And there's the Latrobe football team. Look at that derby. The derby is really good. Latrobe football team, and they look so 1890s, don't they? With the mustaches and all, and the bowler hat and all. So that was a football team from Latrobe, Pennsylvania. They became the first team to play a full season with only professionals in 1897. The Frankfurt Athletic Club is a rather interesting study or case study for the Green Bay Packers, because it would be the Frankfurt Athletic Association, not the Green Bay Packers. That was the first locally owned by fans team. They organized in May of 1899, community team. And if you wanted to get involved, you bought a share of the team, $10. But if you couldn't afford the $10 in the 1890s, it was $1 or $2.50 that you could become a contributing member. In keeping with its charter, which stated all profits shall be donated to charity, all of the team's excess income was donated to a local charity or charitable institutions. And this is kind of what the Green Bay Packers still do until this day, 2021. The original Frankfurt Athletic Association disbanded prior to the 1909 football season. Football was all over the place. There were leagues all over the place. Players went from league to league. Whoever paid them the most, that's where they went. The NFL's oldest team is the Arizona Cardinals. They did not start in Arizona, which did not become a state until 1912. They started in Chicago as the Morgan Athletic Club. In 1899, a neighborhood team played under the name of the Morgan Athletic Club. It's formed on the south side of Chicago. The team later became known as the Normals, then the Racine, for a street in Chicago, Racine Cardinals, and then the Chicago Cardinals. The team would relocate to St. Louis in 1960, where they became known as the St. Louis Cardinals football team, the baseball team that was there. In 1988, the owner, Bill Bidwell, moved that team to Tempe, Arizona, renamed it the Phoenix Cardinals. In 1994, Bidwell then renamed the team again, the Arizona Cardinals, because his team was not drawing well, and he figured if it became a regional or state team, people would come see the team. The team remains in operation today. It is going into its 123rd season. It's the oldest continuing operation in pro football. And it won the 1902 Chicago Football League champion. In fact, they were a pretty good team through the 1920s. Baseball's involved with football, turn of the 20th century, with baseball, Philadelphia Athletics, and the Philadelphia Phillies formed professional football teams. And they joined with the Pittsburgh Steelers, the first attempt at the pro league, named the National Football League, 1902. Didn't go anywhere. The Chicago Football League was formed, several local clubs, Chicago Tigers, outside team, Hammond, Indiana, Rockford, Illinois, Decatur, Illinois, Racine, Illinois, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 90 miles away from Chicago. That was the Chicago League. There was a league in Ohio. It was a league in New York State. By 1904, Ohio had at least 7 professional teams, with Massillon winning the professional title, which was called the Ohio Independent Championship. Massillon today does not have a pro football team, but they have a pretty good high school team, and they are perennially one of the best high school teams in the United States. There's a problem with Oyster Bay's own Theodore Roosevelt. Football had become a rather dangerous endeavor by 1905. There were at least 22 college kids killed on the field in 1904, another 18, 1905, and Roosevelt's feeling pressure to do something about this game that's killing youths or athletes, teenagers and young adults. Theodore Roosevelt threatened to ban football in America unless the rules were implemented to make the game safer. Reported 40 players died from injuries suffered on the field over a 2-year period. So he decides he's going to convene a White House summit on football in 1905. No one could actually figure out how Roosevelt could just end the game. I mean, was he going to go to the coal mines in West Virginia and say, hey, you can't play anymore? Oh, yeah, he could kind of ban college, I suppose, or high school, or the pros. You could, but how are you going to ban a sport? You know, you can't do that. But maybe a threat would get playing rules changed to make the game safer. And that's what happened. The Roosevelt Initiative would eventually lead to the formation of the NCAA. Theodore Roosevelt was not keen, didn't really like the president of Harvard, Charles Eliot. And Eliot wanted to get rid of football if it wasn't changed. It's like horse feathers. Professor Wagstaff in the Marx Brothers movie, which lampooned football. Whatever it is, I'm against it. Roosevelt and Eliot. The Harvard contingent wanted to change football. They came to the Oval Office in December of 1905, as did the president of Yale and the president of Princeton. Walter Camp in Yale said, hey, wait a minute, I wrote these rules. I wrote these rules in 1879, 76 rather, 29 years ago. I want to keep football as is. Princeton was an interested bystander. But these were the kind of things that Roosevelt was seeing in newspapers. Guy playing football, skull and his crossbones or skeleton lined up over football, which was a watermelon-sized shaped ball, which you couldn't throw very easily, at least the forward pass. And he's wearing a shawl, deaths. Behind him, a whole bunch of dead football players. The 12th player in every game, death. I demand that football change its rules or be abolished. Change the game or forsake it, said Roosevelt. But he really didn't want to get rid of the game. See, Theodore Roosevelt Jr. liked the game, even though he suffered major injuries in high school and in college. And so Theodore Roosevelt, the old man, he thought that being outdoors, being a rugged outdoorsman was key to being happy as a male and proved you're a man. Football could prove that you're a man. You're banged up enough, make you tougher. Roosevelt had a soft spot in the game, not only for Theodore Roosevelt, but 10 of the Rough Riders, soldiers who fought with him in Cuba when he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. It goes up San Juan Hill. They listed their occupations as football players when they signed up in 1898. So Rough Riders, the kid, the hatred of Eliot, all this aligns with Roosevelt keeping the game going. The American Football Rules Committee is formed after the White House meeting in December of 1905. 1906, there were plays designed to open up the game, make it less dangerous to play. You couldn't pick up a guy and just throw him 5 yards. It wasn't first down and 5 anymore. It's first down and 10. So it's less dangerous to play. College football survives. The committee passed legislation, introduces the forward pass, change the size of the football a little bit so you could throw it instead of heaving it behind you. Change the distance for first down from 5 to 10 yards. All mass formations gone. Gang tackling gone. They were going to clean up the game. Whether they cleaned up the game or not is another question, because in 2014, Barack Obama at the White House had a summit on concussions and head injuries in football. And then there was the concussion movie with Will Smith. And then there was the NFL saying, we don't want any of this out anymore. And they somehow buried the concussion issue. They buried it, swept it under the rug. Jim Thorpe, All-American. Jim Thorpe won all those gold medals at the 1912 Stockholm Olympics that were later stripped from him because he's a professional baseball player. Becomes a professional football player with the Canton Bulldogs in 1915 when Jack Cusick signs him, and he names the team the Bulldogs, Canton, outside of Cleveland. 1916, Thorpe and his former Carlisle High School teammate, Pete Kellick, starring. Canton goes 9-0-1 and claims the Ohio League Championship, and they claim the Pro Football Championship. Now, Pro Football Championship didn't become a championship thing until the 1930s. They just played seasons, and whoever was standing at the end got the record, and they had the best record. They were the ones who were champions, but there is nothing like the Super Bowl today, or prior to that, the NFL championship game or the AFL championship game. They just played out the season. Hey, you won 9 games. You tied 1. That's the best record. You go home with it. Curly Lambeau. Today, Curly Lambeau would be considered some sort of marketing genius. He does his stuff in 1919. He was the Jerry Jones of his era, I suppose, the Dallas Cowboy owner. Curly Lambeau came up with some innovations out of necessity. Didn't know what he was doing, more than likely. but he came up with innovations. In 1919, Earl Curly Lambeau and George Calhoun organized the Green Bay Packers. They were named after Lambeau's employee, the Indian Packing Company. They gave them $500 to get equipment, used the team practice facilities. And in exchange, they were sort of the naming rights holder of the football team. They became the Packers. Today, there are all kinds of naming rights things that are going on, including of stadiums, of gates in stadiums. So he kind of stumbles upon this, and they run with it later on, much later on, half century to 3/4 of a century later. The NFL is coming, not quite yet. 1920, the Akron Pros, professional football champions. In fact, if you look at the bottom of that picture, you will see Fritz Pollard, one of two African Americans in what would eventually become known as the National Football League. He's part of the 1920 Akron Professionals, or Akron Pros. They win the 1920 championship. There was a need for a central league in the late 19 teens after World War I. There were a lot of leagues around, and the football quote-unquote owners, guys like Curly Lambeau, were looking at the dramatic rise in salaries, maybe from $2 a game to about $8 a game. Players would jump from one team to another, win other contracts, and just look for the highest offer. And college football players were playing in the pros on Sunday. And how they do that, keep their identity, well, people knew who they were, but they wore masks. They put masks over their face and they cut out the eyes, and basically cut out a breathing area. That was it. So they would play on the weekends to pick up some money. The American Professional Football Conference organizes in 1920. These guys didn't know what they were doing, other than the fact that they didn't want to pay players and then see the players leave, like the guys in 1892, Heffelfinger. The Akron Pros, the Canton Bulldogs, Cleveland Indians, and Dayton Triangles. 8 teams from Ohio meet, Canton, Ohio, and they form the American Professional Football Conference. Another meeting takes place, and now you got teams not only from Ohio, but Indiana, New York, and Illinois in attendance, and they all sign in or sign up, and the name is changed to the American Professional Football Association. Not quite the NFL yet. One of those teams that joins is the Decatur Staleys. George Halas, the guy in the middle. Oh, before I get rid of this picture, remember the college players I talked about before I get rid of this picture? That's George Trafton. He's on the left in the front row, the last guy in the front row. John Bankard was the head of the Pro Football Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. And we got to talking about the history of the NFL one day, the late John Bankard. And he said, oh yeah, the college guys used to come in. I'll give you a story. I said, okay, let me hear the story. He says, one day these two teams are playing, and Trafton is playing, and everybody knew who Trafton was because he was missing his index finger. So he's playing center. Guy on the other side of the ball looks at Trafton and says, hey, wait, didn't I play against you yesterday? No. Of course, you couldn't just saw his eyes. You could hear him. No. Yeah, it's really funny because I played yesterday, and the guy who was the center of the team was missing his index finger, just like you. Yes, Trafton did play college and pros. George Halas, the name change. The Chicago Bears start in 1921, although the franchise starts in 1920. A. Staley, who had all kinds of companies, including a car company, turned the Decatur Staleys over to the player coach George Halas, who in 1919 was a right fielder with the New York Yankees until he was replaced by, I can't forget the guy's name. He wore number 3, kind of heavy set. George Ruth. George Ruth. That was who he replaced Halas as the right fielder of the Yankees. So he moves the team over to Cubs Park in Chicago. Staley, this is naming rights again. Halas, Curly Lambeau. You know, it's Staley gives him $5,000 to keep the name Staley. That's a lot of money back then. It's about $80,000 now, something like that. To keep the name Staley's for one more year, marketing partner. George never knew it. And Hallis makes his halfback, Ed Dutch Sterneman, his partner. And that is Fritz Pollard. There is a National Football League group today called the Fritz Pollard Alliance. And they bring up names of people of color who should be coaches in the National Football League or in management. Fritz Pollard was the first Black coach in National Football League history. Not a head coach, but he was a co-coach. He immediately earned a place in pro football's history, one of two African Americans in the league that would become the National Football League. And in 1921, he was the first African American head coach in NFL history when the Akron Pros named him co-coach of the team. Now, in the 1980s, I was covering a lot of football. It was easy, it was once a week. And the New York Jets at the Meadowlands playing the Los Angeles Raiders. It's the week that Art Shell is named the coach of the Raiders, becoming the first African-American coach in modern NFL history. And somebody asked Art, well, what's it like? He says, I don't know. He said, I'm not the first. There was Fritz Pollard. The NFL did not employ Black players between 1933 and 1945. Fritz Pollard used to make a point of it to blame George Hallis for not having Black players. The Black player issue probably was caused by George Preston Marshall, who's the owner of the Boston team, who told anybody to listen that he was a racist. Pollard Brown, University to Akron. He went to Brown University. It was evident in my first year at Akron back in 1919, they didn't want Blacks in there getting that money. Here I was playing and coaching and pulling down the highest salary in pro football. Meanwhile, up in Green Bay, Curly Lambeau and his team, they're in trouble. In 1922, they withdraw from the American Professional Football Association because they used college players in 1921 and caught. But Curly Lambeau wanted the team in Green Bay. Teams in all these little cities anyway. Why not Green Bay? Staten Island had a team in the NFL back in the 1920s. So Lambeau says, all right, I'll obey the league rules. And he took out $50, probably $750 now, and buys back the team for $50. Then he goes broke. The local merchants like the Green Bay Packers, and they decide, hey, Curly, here's $2,500. Finish the season. Oh, and we're also going to have a public nonprofit corporation set up to run the team. And if you got to sell the team and it's got to leave Green Bay, and if there's any money left around, it goes to the local American Legion Post. Curly says, okay. The league says, okay. The community owns the team. Like the community had the Frankfurt team way back when, 20 years earlier or so. You can, to this day, buy stock in the Green Bay Packers. Stock is really worthless. It's just something that you put on the wall. Hey, I got 2 shares of the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay Packers make about $15 million annually now. But that was the only way that Curly Lambeau could keep the Green Bay Packers going. And it was not an easy go because the team was teetering a few times, particularly in the 1950s. That is Red Grange. And if you're a New York Giants fan out there, number 77 should be hanging from the Meadowlands rafters, even though he never played it down for the New York Giants, because Red Grange saved the New York Giants football team from going belly up in 1925. He was the galloping ghost. And he was up there with the Babe Ruth, and Jack Dempsey as great heroes, sports heroes of the 1920s, along with the 4 Horsemen of Notre Dame, and maybe even Al Jolson, and later on, Lucky Lindy, Charles Lindbergh, and Gertrude Ederle, who was the first woman to swim the English Channel, and she got a parade down Broadway. So Red Grange was in that rarefied air. The Galloping Ghost, University of Illinois. He signs, even though his graduating class or his class hadn't graduated yet. They would in 1926. And there was this NFL rule that you couldn't use players who hadn't graduated yet or class hadn't graduated yet. But George Halas ran the National Football League. So George Halas didn't worry about rules back in 1925. So he signs the University of Illinois running back, Red Grange. And he does not necessarily do it for the NFL season. Now, the signing clearly violated the NFL rules about college eligibility and all, but hey, you know what? Rules are made to be broken. It's just a sheet of paper. Chicago would go on a barnstorming tour featuring Red Grange. And it is very, very possible, very, very possible that the NFL was saved because of Red Grange. The New York Giants franchise was saved because of Red Grange. Okay, so the signing violates the rules. But then again, these people were not sophisticated business people back then. You know, they basically were hoping just to break even and not lose more than $250 for the season. But this signing clearly violates NFL rules. However, it builds the league. College football at this point is a bit more popular than the NFL. Chicago goes on a barnstorming tour, and they crisscross the country. Thanksgiving Day in Chicago against the Chicago Cardinals. Chicago Bears playing at Cubs Field, and Red Grange is on the field for the Bears. 36,000 people are there. Then there's barnstorming. St. Louis, Philadelphia, New York, Washington, Boston, Pittsburgh, Detroit, Chicago, eventually LA. He saves the Giants franchise. Red Grange never played it down for the New York Giants, but he saves their franchise. Crowd of 73,000 people watched the Chicago Bears play the New York Giants at the Polo Grounds. 73,000 people spending a lot of money to watch Red Grange and putting that money into Tim Mara's pocket. You know, Tim Mara is now looked as the patriarch of the New York Giants, but he was part of a group in the NFL that were, he ran numbers. He's a bootlegger. That's what he was. So was Bill Dwyer, who owned the Brooklyn Dodgers in the National Football League. And Art Rooney, he ended up in the National Football League when he had a big day at Aqueduct Racetrack, and he decided to put that money in the football team in Pittsburgh. 77,000. Bigger attendance was coming. 73,000 Polo Grounds. 75,000 Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum when the Bears beat the Los Angeles Tigers. 75,000 people came out. Also in 1925 is one of the interesting quirks of the National Football League. National Football League didn't even think of holding a championship game. Why should they hold a championship game? Hopefully the teams lasted the season. Some teams did, some teams didn't. And there were teams in these little areas like Pottsville, Pennsylvania. Pottsville, 90 miles from Philadelphia. The legendary Pottsville Maroons football team played as a member of the NFL between 1925 and 1928. In 1925, the Maroons compiled a record widely viewed as the league's best. They climaxed their season by defeating Notre Dame in a well-publicized pro versus college match in Philadelphia. That's when the trouble starts. But they were denied the NFL championship in a controversial league decision. Despite strong regional support, their franchise moved to Boston in 1929. And every once in a while, you'll have a senator or a congressman from Pennsylvania petitioning the NFL saying, we rightfully won the championship in Pottsville in 1925. We won our championship. The disputed championship. Remember, the NFL is not very sophisticated at this point. December 6, 1925. Pottsville Maroons beat the Chicago Cardinals in what is widely considered to be the 1925 NFL championship game. The Maroons, they go into the game with a 9-2 record. Cardinals, south side of Chicago, 9-1-1, 9-1. Heading into the showdown with the Maroons. The NFL didn't have an official championship game. Pottsville won the game, and they had the best record in the NFL. but they were not going to get the league title because, see, after they beat Chicago, they decided, hey, we're the champions. Let's go down to Philadelphia. Let's play Notre Dame, the College Stars. And they did play Notre Dame. Shibe Park in Philadelphia. Frankfurt Yellow Jackets were really upset. They thought that Frankfurt was part of Philadelphia's, or Philadelphia's part of their territory, and that Pottsville violated the Yellow Jackets' territory, and they took fans away from the game that they were hosting on the same day. The NFL president, Joseph Carr, said to Frankfurt, we agree. Prior to the Pottsville Notre Dame match, Carr warned the Maroons 3 times not to play the game. Fines them $500. $500, like $800 to me. Suspended the team's right to the championship, revoked the Pottsville franchise. They would come back. Chris O'Brien, who's the owner of the Chicago Cardinals, said, no. We didn't beat them on the field. If we beat them on the field, that would be one thing. But we didn't do that. The NFL recognizes Chicago as the 1925 champion, even though their owner said, we didn't beat them on the field. You shouldn't be giving us the championship. Grange wants to be rewarded. After all, he saved the New York Giants, among other things, and he wants his own team in the NFL. And his agent, C.C. Pyle, says, give us a team. No. Well, they signed a 5-year contract to play at Yankee Stadium. And this would be the beginning of the first of 4 American Football League teams. Red plays with the New York Yankees. The American Football League is organized by C.C. Pyle, represented Red Grange, and this is Red Grange's showcase. He's got a 5-year deal to play at Yankee Stadium. They got a team in L.A. called the Wildcats. But basically, the league is to show off Red Grange. Oh, the Wildcats, they're not a real football team in the sense that they're playing in L.A. They're a road football team. The first NFL team, the Los Angeles Buccaneers, was in 1926. They too were a road team based in Chicago, made up of Californians, primarily from the University of California and also from the University of Southern California, alumni. One player who did not play for the LA Buccaneers was a guy by the name of Marion Morrison. Marion Morrison was a big guy who played at the University of Southern California, who kind of ran into some trouble with his coaches and was basically forced off the team. But some of those University of Southern California football players were extras in movies, including Marion Morrison. Changed his name. You know him better as John Wayne. He never did get a chance to play for the Los Angeles Buccaneers. He was gone and busy doing something else. The Buccaneers did play 2 true home games in Los Angeles. They were exhibition games against Red Grange and the New York Yankees, although he's hurt. The Buccaneers also played 2 games in San Francisco, including the last game of its existence, an exhibition game against the AFL's Los Angeles Wildcats, and the AFL would eventually fold and Grange would get into the NFL. The football salary, $75 to $100 a game. Although 20 years ago, I was speaking over in the Riverdale Y in the Bronx, the Riverdale Y in the Bronx. And there was a tall guy, he was a guy in his 80s, 90s, excellent shape. He was rigid as can be, stood up straight. He's about 6'2", even in his 80s and 90s. And we're talking, and he said he had played pro football, Staten Island. And I said, how much you get a game? He said, maybe $10 a game, maybe. 75 to 100 probably went to the best player. The average ticket price was $1. The typical team was about 15 players, and they figured out all kinds of ways to split the revenue. Green Bay and Chicago, they're considered the most intense rivalry in the NFL. More so than the Giants, Redskins, Eagles, Redskins, the Washington football team. The Washington football team, Cowboys, Giants, Eagles, Giants, Cowboys, Cowboys against the other 3 teams, the NFC East. But this rivalry is considered to be the hottest rivalry. It's the longest rivalry, back to 1920. But they really needed each other. George Halas on the left and Curly Lambeau on the right, although Lambeau was kicked out by the end of the 1940s from Green Bay. Money is tight. In 1931, it's the Depression years, and the NFL falls to 10 teams and 8 teams in 1931. That was the lowest in NFL history. The Green Bay, I guess you'd call him the owner, except it was owned by the people of Green Bay and Wisconsin and whoever else invested in the team. The guy who ran the team, Curly Lambeau, probably saved the Chicago Bears from default in 1932 by advancing a $1,500 loan. And Lee Remmel, who was running the Green Bay Packers Museum back in 1994, and I'm there, and Lee said, I want to show you something. And what he showed me was this IOU from George Halas to Curly Lambeau saying, I owe you $1,500 and you'll get it back. George Halas had to meet the payroll for the Chicago Bears. If he didn't meet the payroll, he would have defaulted, and maybe the only team left in Chicago would have been the Cardinals. Oh, back to the Frankfurt Yellow Jackets, league champions, 1926, Philadelphia area. They joined the NFL in 1924. They couldn't play games on Sunday because of blue laws in Pennsylvania, so they played on Saturday. They won the 1926 championship. Before the start of the 1931 season, the Frankfurt Stadium was severely damaged by fire, and they had to go looking elsewhere. And they ended up playing at the Philadelphia Municipal Stadium, which is either the home now of the Philadelphia Eagles or the Philadelphia Phillies, because those two stadiums are next to each other, or the Flyers or the 76ers, because they share that whole complex. And Baker Bowl, where the Philadelphia Phillies played. The team had hoped to draw broader support from Philadelphia. Didn't happen. They folded after the season. Philadelphia Eagles and Brooke Bell would enter the league in 1933. Brooke Bell would become a major player in the NFL. What helped pro football and college football was bigger at the time, was Hollywood movies based on the college game. One of my favorite movies is Horse Feathers with the Marx Brothers, and it still holds up. It's written in 1932, Lampoon College Sports. This movie is 89 years old, and it was written 100 years ago. Quincy Adams Wagstaff is the new president of Huxley University, and he goes to a speakeasy looking for football players. And he ends up with Chico and Harpo, Baravelli and Pinky. His school, he wants to beat the rival Darwin University. And there are a lot of funny lines in there based in truth about college football. Mickey Mouse and Popeye were subjects of the first two football cartoons, and there was also a song, You Gotta Be a Football Hero to Get Along with the Beautiful Girls, by Al Sherman, not Alan Sherman, hello mother, hello father, Buddy Fields and Al Lewis, who was not Schnauzer from Car 54, Where Are You, or Grandpa Munster. So you had the cartoons, had the song, you had the movies. Got to be a football hero like Zeppo, Groucho, Harpo, and Chico. Or get on the cover of Time magazine like they did with the chariot scene in the end of Horse Feathers. Or like Mickey Mouse scoring a touchdown. Or you got to be a football hero to win olive oil. You got to be a football hero. J.E. Richards buys the Portsmouth team in the NFL, Portsmouth, Ohio, moves them to Detroit. And this is a business move. And it's one of the first business moves and one of the first moves that kind of professionalizes the National Football League. See, J.E.A. Richards owned WJR Radio in Detroit, and he needed some programming for his radio station. So he buys the football team, moves them to Detroit, and then does something else. G.A. Richards moves one of his games to Thanksgiving. The Detroit Thanksgiving Day Parade ends in front of the stadium, so he's hoping to get some spillover into the stadium. But one other thing that happened that day, that game was on national radio. His station was NBC affiliate, Sarnoff, David Sarnoff. And the NFL discovers that media could bring in some money. Within 5 years, 6 football seasons, the NFL is on TV on W2XBS, Channel 1 in New York, which would eventually become WNBT, and Brooklyn Dodger games were on WNBT, the baseball team and the NFL team. The second incarnation of the American Football League, AFL2, becomes a rival to the NFL in 1936. At that point, the NFL had 9 teams, played in many large population centers, and the AFL competed with them directly in a number of these cities. The AFL folds, but the NFL wants Cleveland and takes in the Cleveland Rams. There'd be one more American Football League right after that, and it folded. Now, one of the reasons football became so popular, wink, wink, is the point spread. And even though Brett Musburger was not supposed to talk about the point spread on the NFL Today back in the 1970s with Jimmy the Greek, an odds maker, hey, football knew where its bread was buttered, the point spread. This guy taught John F. Kennedy, President John Kennedy, at Riverdale High School over in the Bronx. This guy was brilliant. University of Chicago graduate, mathematician, and he comes up with the point spread. He was a compulsive gambler. Bet on anything, absolutely anything. And he should be in every sports hall of fame as a builder. Because if you look today, all the leagues have partnerships with casinos, legalized sports gambling. In the 1930s, Charles K. McNeil may have invented the point spread, which made the outcome of football games more interesting than the final score for bettors, because there were point differentials. And you had to figure out if one team was 3.5 points better than the other team. It's not known whether McNeil came up with the idea or borrowed it. He was pretty much a loner, but he certainly refined it and opened up a new, although it was a legal industry, called betting. And now there's legalized betting everywhere. I'm not sure if you have it on Long Island, though, because it's up in upstate New York, and we'll see whether or not Governor Huckle will refine gambling and get a gambling set up near you out in Nassau County. World War II comes along, and the NFL is faced with another problem. Can they survive World War II? Franklin Roosevelt sends a letter to the baseball commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, after World War II starts and Pearl Harbor is bombed, and he says, go ahead, play baseball. And Dan Rooney, the late Dan Rooney, and I were talking one day, and he said, with that letter, we decided we were going to play. And Pittsburgh had a problem because of the way the rosters were set up. They were retired players, some college players who left college, and there were military people. If you were in Philadelphia, you had the Philadelphia Naval Station. If you're in New York, you had Camp Shanks, of course, over in Rockland County, and you also had where Bayonne now, where the cruise ships leave. You had a Navy base over there, so you can get players. You get players in Chicago. You get players in most of football, the teams that were in the NFL at that point. But Pittsburgh was a problem. No military bases nearby. So the Rooney family, or Art Rooney, decided to merge his team with Philadelphia's, get players on the team who were stationed at Philadelphia Naval Base. That didn't work out too well. In 1944, he merged with the Chicago Cardinals. The 43 team was called the Steagles. The 44 team, the Carpets. Same reason. Chicago, the Great Lakes Naval stations were there. Station was there. He could get football players. The league would survive. Had 1945 been a war year, Rooney would have merged with the Brooklyn team. Again, because of the military people around, but the war basically ended and the NFL was able to move ahead. The All-American Football Conference starts in 1946. The NFL barred black players starting in 1933, and that would be lifted after the 1945 season. The All-American Football Conference was the idea of Archer Ward, who was a sports writer with the Chicago Tribune? Yeah, Chicago Tribune. And they put together this league as a rival to the National Football League. The NFL is still a mom and pop operation. Competition from the All-American Football Conference. The Los Angeles team had Don Amici and Bob Hope as two of its investors. And a Mexican guy owned the team. So it was was an interesting league, the All-American Football Conference, because it wasn't the usual well-heeled white guy like George Preston Marshall, who had the Boston team, and is the guy who pushed for the color barrier to go up in 1933. George Preston Marshall was a guy who would tell you he's a racist, didn't have any problems. So the first, the black or Negro players would return to rosters in 1946, not 1945, for the first time in a whole bunch of years, since 1932. And there's one of the guys who did it, Spartacus, Kirk Douglas, the movie. The NFL came to Los Angeles in 1946. All-American Football Conference was there too. The problem for Daniel Reeves, who's moving the Cleveland Rams to Los Angeles, is that the Los Angeles Coliseum was built with federal money and state money. And there was an equal opportunity employment clause in every contract, which meant that the NFL was going to have to desegregate whether George Preston Marshall or George Alice liked it or not. And the initial vote was to say no to Los Angeles. Woody Strode, who became an actor, was one of the first. Daniel Reeves moves from Cleveland to LA, and he's got to hire Negro players. It's part of the agreement with the Los Angeles Coliseum Commission, and he does. He hires Kenny Washington. But there were 33 men on each team, and the Los Angeles Rams, it was 31 white guys and 2 Negroes. And they, other than being on the field, never crossed paths. 1946, the San Francisco 49ers, the Cleveland Browns, and the Baltimore Colts are in the All-American Football Conference. Actually, it was the Miami Seahawks that moved to Baltimore in 1947. They joined the NFL in 1950. Breaking the color barrier in the All-American Football Conference, not a problem. The Cleveland Rams owner, hey, he had to do what he had to do to get into the Los Angeles market, but the All-American Football Conference didn't have that problem. Paul Brown was coach of Cleveland Browns. And I talked to him about 35 years ago about breaking the color barrier, and he just said, what color barrier? Somebody was green, yellow, orange, blue, yellow, Martian. If they could play football, they had a spot on my team. Bill Willis and Marion Motley, that was Motley, who you just saw, were hired by Paul Brown, became teammates, lifelong friends. They endured taunts, racial slurs, dirty play from opponents on the field, and they couldn't go to Miami for one game in 1946 because of death threats. They were welcomed by their teammates. Admiral TV, for those of you old enough to remember the old Admiral TVs, they wanted to sell TVs in Southern California, and they decided, well, we're going to underwrite the Los Angeles Rams football games, and hopefully people will go to their store and buy an Admiral TV. And so that's what they tried to do. And it worked out well, I suppose, for Admiral, but not for the Rams, because in 1949, with home games blacked out, the 6 home games blacked out, 300,000 fans went to the 6 home games. But in 1950, because the games were televised locally, it dropped by 50%. NFL is becoming business savvy at this point. The commissioner, Burt Bell, who came in with Philadelphia, became the commissioner, said to the NFL teams, protect your gate. No home games. 1951, blackout policy is introduced. Blackout rule still debated in Washington to some extent. The FCC is saying that the rule should end. They're making so much money off TV, billions upon billions of dollars. But the NFL says, hey, we want, this is kind of interesting. The NFL, the Jets do not sell out, except they sell out all their premium seats, which is the club seats and the luxury boxes. But you could get tickets up to game time for all the, single seats here and there. They're not technically sold out. So they shouldn't be televising the game in the New York area on Channel 2, but they do. The rules are meant to be broken. It was a semi-pro operation. That's Stan Jones, who played with the Chicago Bears in the 1950s. The NFL had 13 teams in 1950. The NFL was a semi-pro league. Stan Jones, an offensive lineman with Chicago, would finish the season in December and then look for another job. We were in the full-time operation. A lot of people don't realize that. Football teams closed down after the last game of the year, packed everything away, and George Hallis, his coach in Chicago, who ran the Bears, wasn't a full-time football man himself. George had a sporting goods store down by in the Loop in Chicago. Most players were not even paid during the 8 weeks of training camp in the 1950s. In fact, that's how, if you're an old New York Giants fan, Andy Robustelli ended up with the Giants. He was playing in Los Angeles, and he told the owner, Daniel Reeves, I got 2 businesses in Stamford, Connecticut. I can't afford to be away for all this time. They need me at the business, and Daniel Reeves traded him to the New York Giants, where he had a Hall of Fame career. But that's the way it was in football. It was really informal. It was a semi-pro operation then. Getting back to Jones, in fact, the players didn't even own their own equipment except for shoes, and the team shared all the equipment. Here's Burt Bell, the NFL commissioner. He was the Eagles founder. But Frank Tripucka, who lived over in New Jersey, wasn't impressed with the NFL. He played with the Chicago Cardinals, came out of Notre Dame. It's probably a step down going to the Chicago Cardinals. Certainly was for John David Crow, who won the Heisman Trophy in 1957 with TCU, and then he ends up with the Chicago Cardinals, and he said it was 2 steps down. But Tripucka played with the Cardinals, and he was ready to pack it in after 1950. A lot of people, 53 rather, a lot of people think, even in those days, that the National Football League was the almighty league, but it really wasn't. The National Football League in those days was haphazard. I was totally disenchanted with football, so I came back here to Bloomfield, New Jersey, where I used to see him. We used to hang out, to call it quits. I get a call from Saskatchewan, Regina, Saskatchewan. And the fellow says, what would it take you to come up here and play? He's making a big $12,000 at the time, Chicago Cardinals. So I hurriedly say, $25,000. And he says, you got it. That was the year they opened up the Canadian Football League to 8 Americans. Prior to that, they only had 3 Americans on each team. And they were competing for players until 1956. And suddenly, they weren't competing for players. Hallis was running the NFL in the 1950s. That's what Tripucka said. He was the founder and pretty much ran the league. Many a time, we used to kid on the field, on the sideline, that the referee would reach into his pocket and first look over at the sidelines to George Hallis. Hallis didn't give him any sign, he'd throw the flag. If Hallis shook his head no, he wouldn't throw the flag. Tripucka is down there on the bottom with the Chicago Cardinals team. Chicago Cardinals. The NFL is jolted starting around 1956 when the owners decide that they're going to expand and they want to go to Houston and Dallas. But, Chicago Cardinals could be moving. There's pressure on the Chicago Cardinals. Get out of Chicago from CBS. Go somewhere else. We want to televise 6 Chicago Bears games a year. We can't do it with you here because you're home when they're on the road. And when they're home, you're on the road. Can't do it. 1958 NFL championship game would change football. American Football League would start in 1959. CBS wants games desperately shown in Chicago. That's Bill Paley, who ran CBS. 2 teams in Chicago caused TV problems. The Chicago Cardinals would play 2 home games a year in other markets to open up TV dates, whether it was Minneapolis or Buffalo. Lamar Hunt was a very young guy. He's like 24 years old in the Hunt family. And Bud Adams tried to buy the Cardinals. Hunt wanted to move him to Dallas. Dallas had failed in 1952 in its opportunity with the NFL. And Houston, there was never a team in Houston. They failed to get the Cardinals. They failed to get an expansion team, so they said, hey, you can't join them. Why don't we start our own? They did start their own, the American Football League. The Bidwell family was persuaded to go to St. Louis. CBS Paley threw in $500,000, $5 million today, to help the Bidwells financially move a grandstand from Chicago to St. Louis in 1960. Chicago could finally see the NFL on TV. Green Bay needed a new stadium in the 1950s, and there were some people in the NFL who said, hey, we got to move this team to Milwaukee, which meant the American Legion Post would get the money when they left Green Bay. The owner of the Bears and the coach, George Halas, used to travel to small Wisconsin towns in the offseason to raise money so Green Bay had enough funds to play from year to year. Tripucka said they did the same thing in Regina, Saskatchewan. So the Saskatchewan Roughriders had enough money to play for year to year. The fundraisers took place in the 1950s. It's still a mom and pop store. By the 1950s, City Stadium in Green Bay was seen as too small and inadequate. They expanded the place. It still wasn't good. The leaders of the NFL, including George Halas, told the Green Bay Packers board of directors, either build a new stadium or move to Milwaukee full time. They're playing some games in Milwaukee. The residents of Green Bay said, okay, we'll go to the polls, and they voted to build a new City Stadium, which is now Lambeau Field. And the old City Stadium became a high school field. The greatest game ever played, 1958, not to New York Giants fans, and believe it or not to members of the Baltimore Colts, who thought the game was rather sloppy. It should never have gone into overtime. But Colts tied in the last minute on a field goal and win it in overtime. Johnny Unitas brings them down the field. The Giants were led by handsome Frank Gifford. They had Kyle Rote, Charlie Connolly, and defense with Sam Huff. December 28th, 1958 was the day the modern NFL started. The Colts beat the Giants in overtime. Unitas drives his team downfield in overtime, hands off to Alan Amici, Don Amici's cousin. They end up in the end zone. The game captures the attention of the American public, just the way it played out. And Lamar Hunt decides it's time for the American Football League. Sam Huff, interesting character who I got to know over the years. He's on the cover of Time magazine. Also, The Violent World of Sam Huff was on CBS in 1960. Rozelle, 33-year-old Pete Rozelle, general manager of the Los Angeles Rams, becomes the commissioner in 1960. Swinging 60s, football's entirely changed between 58 and 66. The Continental Baseball League, which never got off the ground. Branch Rickey was running that. He leaves behind the plans with Lamar Hunt, who co-ops it for the American Football League. American Football League. Television. Television plays a major role. Congress, president signed the 1961 Sports Broadcast Act into law, and that starts sending real money into the NFL. Two leagues start bidding for players back in 1964-65. There's a merger. The merger between the American Football League and National Football League needed congressional approval, and they got it by trading a franchise, the New Orleans Saints, in exchange for congressional votes. The game changer, Pete Gogolak, who ended up playing with the New York Giants. The NFL and the Giants called to explain Gogolak. I signed with the Giants, made 3 times as much as I made with the Bills. I signed for $35,000. They gave me a 4-year no-cut contract. I went to the Giants. The team wasn't as good as the Bills. Then you know what happened. The AFL started calling NFL players. The war started, and basically a few months later, the two leagues merged. So maybe I started something. Not only started soccer-style kick, but maybe started the merger. And there is Pete Rozelle, who had to go to Congress and get the merger done. Joe Namath made the Super Bowl important. 1968. It's still not a major league business. The Jets could not practice at Shea Stadium. Why? Because the Mets have a contract that they could play at Shea Stadium until the end of the season and not have the Jets play there or practice there. Well, the Jets used to go around to Flushing Meadow Park, and Namath and Ralph Baker and Larry Grantham and everybody on the team went through the field to pick up the glass that was on the field. Hey, they did that also in Oakland. It wasn't a Jets thing. Finally, the Jets would practice. They find a practice facility at Rikers Island. Joe Namath tells a story about Rikers Island. This is, they used to get dressed at Shea Stadium, used to get on the bus. They'd go on to Rikers Island. They would come in there, and the guards would watch the bus, and nobody would sneak into the bus to get out. And he said, then the Jets would practice there, and all the prisoners would be around there. So Namath is not having a good day at practice one day, and he's overthrowing everybody and all, and he hears a voice from the sidelines yelling, "Hey, Broadway Joe, you keep throwing like that, you're going to be 11th Avenue Joe soon enough." Jets won the Super Bowl. practicing at Rikers Island Prison. It was a validation of careers. Ron Mix told me, he was the Hall of Fame tackle with the San Diego Chargers, and he wrote a letter to Namath and Lenny Dawson because Kansas City Chiefs of the AFL won the 1969 Super Bowl. And he wrote a letter thanking them for validating his football career in the American Football League. And there is Joe and me and Bruce Morton back in 1988. Joe talking about the Super Bowl, and behind Joe is Weeb Eubank, the coach of the Jets. Jets won 16-7. Didn't do very much. Handed the ball off to Matt Snell. Played great defense. All those interceptions. They won the game. Monday Night Football and Howard Cosell and Don Meredith. The money is beginning to flow in. I got to know Howard. I'm still friendly with his grandsons, Colin, who's the PA announcer for the New York Mets, Justin, who's a charter school principal, and Jared, who is a lawyer at ESPN. Football becomes entertainment. Well, Namath was entertainment. Sonny Werblin. When he and Leon Hess and the other guys got the Jets, convinced the American Football League that you needed some entertainment. Namath was entertainment. He was out of town, man about town in Manhattan. 1970. It was Howard Cosell and Dandy Don Meredith, the Dandy Roo, that people tuned in to see, not necessarily the football game. Will the country bumpkin get the best of the city slicker, Cosell? A lot of alcohol flowed. Keith Jackson was the announcer the first year. That was in Cleveland. Keith was bumped off the games, went to college football, and said it's probably added 10 years to his life. The Giffer, Frank Gifford, who recommended Don Meredith to Roone Arledge as Cosell's foil, was the replacement for Keith Jackson. Monday Night Football is still going strong. It's now on ESPN. It begins its 52nd season on Monday night. It's a business in the 1970s. It's no longer that mom and pop shop. Television contracts give the teams more money. The World Football League tries to challenge the NFL in 74-75. The NFL decides we're going to take two of the best available markets, expand to them, Seattle and Tampa, for 1976. The Players Association shows its muscle. They begin labor actions against the NFL owners and sue them. In the 1980s, football has all kinds of pains. It's me in the middle talking to Harvey Meyerson, who was hired by Donald Trump as the USFL lawyer in the antitrust suit with the NFL. Meyerson actually won the case but lost the war because he didn't get money. They got $3 and he forgot to ask the jury why they gave him so little money. Anyway, 1982 is a players' strike, shuts down the league for 7 weeks. 1982, the USFL starts for the 1983 season. 1986 is the USFL NFL antitrust case. 1987, there's a players' strike. But the game's popularity booms, absolutely booms in the 1980s, and long gone are the days of the mom and pop stores. TV would enrich the owners and players even more. In 1993, Rupert Murdoch gives the NFL huge sums of money. He blows out CBS, and it's basically builds a network around the NFL, the Fox syndication arm or the Fox network. The NFL became a political force in the 1990s in Arizona. Martin Luther King Day, the voters said no to Martin Luther King Day in 1990. The NFL said, if you say yes, we'll give you the you could have the Super Bowl there in 1993. But if you say no, we pull the Super Bowl, which is what they did. But we'll give you a do-over in 1992. If you vote yes for Martin Luther King Day, we'll give you the 1996 Super Bowl. And guess what? The NFL got its way. Lots of franchise movement. Cleveland moved to Baltimore. Houston to Nashville. The Anaheim Rams that moved from LA to Anaheim in 1980. They go to St. Louis. The Oakland Raiders go down to were in Los Angeles. They moved back to Oakland. Brain injuries became a big deal in the last 10 years, and they have gone away. Just gone away. NFL doesn't want to talk about it. It's had some sort of settlement with former players on concussions. You don't hear about it. Nor do you hear about Colin Kaepernick anymore. Takes a knee in 2016 preseason games. To protest what he said was police action against African Americans. He hasn't played in the NFL since 2016 and will never play in the NFL again. He's been effectively blackballed. Too hot to handle. Roger Goodell actually sort of apologized to him last year during the George Floyd demonstrations and said the NFL would listen to all of its athletes, that Black Lives Matter. But it's a well-oiled machine. As you know, there's a game in a few minutes between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Dallas Cowboys. Concussions are still a problem, but nobody talks about it. And Colin Kaepernick is now protesting whatever he's protesting, and the NFL has gone on its way and he's gone on his way. The NFL says they will listen to concerns of their players. The NFL has grown from the days where it was a mom and pop store to where it is a multi-billion-dollar business getting billions of dollars from TV. And cities throw billions of dollars at owners to move their teams and build stadiums for them. And now we're hearing about that in Buffalo. The Pagula family wants to build a $1.4 billion stadium, 60,000 seat stadium in Orchard Park. And they want New York State taxpayers to pay for it. I want to thank the Huntington Library for inviting me. If you have any questions or comments, feel free. Any questions or comments? Well, thank you, James, for being here tonight. And thanks to the library.
Thank you.
And I will send you a copy of this. We will talk again, I'm sure, in the